Hello and welcome to Check 1 2, where we give you the lowdown on testicular cancer by talking to survivors, advocates and supporters of testicular cancer awareness here at the world famous podcast studio Glasgow. So my guest today is Simon Feldman, who has an inspirational story. Not only, as a young man did he get his first diagnosis at 20 years old while being out in Australia, but Simon incredibly went on to have a diagnosis of testicular cancer in a total of 3 times. Simon's story today talks about those 3 diagnoses, not only the impact that it had on him wanting and trying to become a father, but that IVF journey and turning all those traumatic experiences into something positive by starting his own coaching company called Coach Simon Limited. So here we are, Simon Feldman. Thanks very much for coming on to Check 1 2. And if you'd just like to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of an introduction to yourself, Tilly, and your cancer story.
Yeah, hi everyone. So firstly, Paul, thanks for having me. My name is Simon Feldman. I'm a 3 times cancer survivor, and I've had a very interesting journey along the way. But I want to use my story and my experiences to hopefully give hope and belief to other men. My cancer story is wrapped up into a story of me also becoming a father and the journey that's taken me on. And now where I find myself 20 years later from my first cancer diagnosis, where I see my purpose is helping other men and other cancer survivors to redefine themselves and to kind of live their best life. So that's me.
Brilliant. No, thanks for that. So I suppose then, just off the top then, can you kind of take us back to that moment where you discovered that, lump and then the subsequent diagnosis and, how that affected you, obviously being out in Australia when this happened. So just, how was that experience, in finding your testicular cancer at that point?
So I was an international student studying abroad in Australia in 2004, and I was having the time of my life. The way that I describe 2004 is like a coin, that one side of the coin was everything was going amazing, and then suddenly the coin flipped and my year flipped upside down and my life changed. So 20 years ago this February, I travelled to Australia with my best friend for university, to a university just outside of Sydney, and we were having the best time ever. At the end of our studies, we decided to hire 3 camper vans with our friends, and we decided to travel around the east coast of Australia. We were making our way to hire a houseboat to sail around Fraser's Island, which is just an idyllic spot. And we got on the boat and it was amazing. And at the top of this houseboat was a viewing deck where you could play cards, watch dolphins, sup beer. It sounds amazing. It was amazing. And at the end of this viewing deck was a fence. And then beyond that fence, we put 2 deck chairs to sunbathe and have the best views on the boat. And it was my turn to go and get that seat at the front of the boat. So I went to climb over the fence and claim my seat. And I am very clumsy, and I slipped and I banged my testicle into the fence. And I was like, I'm in pain here. And that pain lasted for 2 days solid. And it was clear by the Thursday that I needed to go and see a doctor. So off we came off the boat. We found, bearing in mind we were only 20-year-olds, trying to find a doctor and to try and understand what was going on. So I managed to find a doctor. That led to me having a scan, an ultrasound, and that led me to about 6 p.m. in the evening being told that there was a 60% chance I had cancer, testicular cancer. And I couldn't believe it. I remember when the doctor was talking to me, there was a painted pattern painting behind him, and I was staring at this painting and I couldn't really quite take it in. And I remember my friend was out of the room, and I was getting the results on my own. I was like, I just couldn't comprehend it. And then I met with my group of friends afterwards, and I hadn't been able to communicate what had been said to me, and I just broke down in tears in front of them all. They were all stood in front of a line, kind of hearing this news, and then they sort of all enveloped me in a hug and kind of their embraces. And it was then a little bit of a whirlwind. The next day, the Friday, had to have, as people were listening to this will probably appreciate, more scans, more blood tests. And that 60% chance it was testicular cancer rose to 70%. And then the following day was a Saturday, and that was the day that I was going to receive my blood test results. And I was in Surfers Paradise on a Saturday morning, and we were in a campsite. And it was very, very eerie in a very beautiful and busy place. And I remember being in this in this car park with loads of cars and vans, and the phone rang. And I took the phone call from the doctor, and I walked through, it felt like a sea of car and vans. And it was a bright blue day. It's the sky in Australia is like a piercing blue sky. And the seas were lapping back and forth behind me. And I took the phone call, and the doctor was talking to me, and he said something like, your cancer markers are over 1,000. And I was like, I don't know. What does that mean? Does that mean I have cancer? And he said, yes. And at that moment, it felt like the technicolor world that I was in, like it's such a vibrant place, Surfers Paradise. It felt that everything paused, everything stopped, everything just drained of color. And I was just stuck in a sea of cars and vans. And then I had to find my way back to my friends and then tell them the news. And then I needed to have a shower. And I remember going into the shower block, and for a really long time, I always dreamt of being a father from a really young age. And I remember having my shower, and next to me was a man with his child, and he was being so loving and so kind and compassionate to his child that I just cried in the shower, because I thought that my dreams of becoming a father had ended. And I thought that, oh, this day couldn't get any worse, but it did, because I was 20 years old in Australia, being away from my mum and dad, and I had to tell them that I had cancer. Like, how do you tell your parents that you have cancer? How do you almost like upend their world? The way that I describe it is that you've got, it's not a nice description, but it's the only way that I can describe it, that you've got a bomb, that you're going to drop a bomb on them, that you're going to literally everything's all right, and then all of a sudden you're going to tell them that when they think that you're having a great time in Australia, that actually you have cancer. So I called the home phone in the middle of the night, and my dad answered. My mum happened to not be there. She'd gone away for the weekend. And I had to tell my dad I had cancer. And my dad was amazing. He was very strong. He is very strong. He's very kind and caring. And he told me that it would be okay. And I don't know how he did it. He managed to reach my mum, and they managed to reach me 2 days later in Brisbane, just literally a matter of hours before I had my tumour removed. And when they rang on the door, I've never seen my mum look like this. She looked grey. I think it was the combination of the flight and the shock that the colour had been sucked out of her. And my parents embraced me, and my mum was very loving. Not that she isn't always, but it was a different type of love and embrace. It was a very maternal embrace and words that she spoke to me.
Yeah.
We then made our way to the hospital, and they talked me through the procedure, and I found it really difficult to get undressed and put myself on the gurney or the trolley to take me down for the operation. And I was very distressed, and they had to give me a sedative to calm me down. And I don't really remember much else. I think it was the sedative that knocked me out before the operation. And then following that, I woke up And I then had to have more scans to find out if the cancer had spread. And it had spread, it spread to my stomach. And that was a really difficult thing to deal with, to know that it actually was stage 2 cancer. And I then had to recover from the operation and make my way home.
And it's quite an emotional thing as well. Not to be told that you had the cancer obviously in your testicle, but then to be told that it made your way to your stomach. It's that kind of worst case scenario thing as well. Emotionally, you sound like you've got a really great support network here. Obviously, your mum and dad and your friends obviously around. But how did you cope with hearing that diagnosis of that secondary cancer? Was that something that kind of took you back even further?
Yes, in a way it did. I perhaps naively thought that if it would have just been kind of located to my testicle, that I'd just be able to recover and carry on with my travels. That's what the plan was, to finish up in Australia, go to New Zealand and Fiji and America before coming back to the UK. That wasn't meant to be. And I think having the stage 2 and all of those worries at 20 years old, worrying, are you going to die? What does this mean? Talked about wanting to be a father. So it was emotionally very difficult. And the summer of 2004 following that was a number of weeks of indecision around whether I needed treatment, whether I needed more surgery, what would be the implication on my body if I had a certain type of surgery because of the cancer. And some of the things that's discussed with you at 20 years old is really hard to contemplate when you've got your whole life in front of you. And it was decided that I did need chemo, and the chemo was very brutal. So I had my chemo, 3 courses of chemo in 2004, so in September 2004, from that September to November. And I was very, very sick. As well as, all the kind of what you would associate with chemo, like losing my hair and so on. But I reacted to the anti-sickness drugs. So it was really difficult time, kind of low energy. I couldn't walk. I remember just not being able to concentrate, having my dinner and being able to sit and try and eat food when I was able to then eat. I could barely sit at the table for a couple of seconds at a time because I was like, I just don't have the concentration to sit there. And you asked me about how did I cope with the emotion. I don't think I coped with it very well. I was very lonely, and
Right.
I didn't really have anyone to relate to. And whilst there were some support networks, I think it's different to what exists today. And already, if anybody is listening to this and they're young or they're old, my advice would be it is worth talking to others who are going through the same thing. It's not that it will take your pain or the emotion away from you, but having the support network and knowing that other people understand that loneliness and the fear, and also that, I don't know what you think, Paul, kind of from your experiences, but there's a bit of dark humor also around cancer, around the things that you end up doing. Uh, One, like, for example, having to urinate in a bucket and have that measured is not something that was fun, or the just all of those strange things. And when you're unwell, and if there's certain medication in a certain way that they need to give it to you, and you're not expecting things to go in a certain place of your body and so on, without being graphic, it's a very lonely and unusual experience. And I think reaching out and getting support from others is really important. And following the 3 courses of chemo and another bout, I caught an infection. So I was in hospital kind of 4 times in the UK, because I was really, as you know, you have low immune system. And I caught a cold and it was really bad, and I had to end up in hospital because I couldn't fight it off. But I did recover eventually, and I made my way back to uni, I would say very battered and bruised, and probably having not dealt with the emotions.
Yeah, I found that as well. That it was. I think I was a little bit older. I was 30 when I found it, and the emotions around for me had came, you know, like being there for my family, and you know, I remember coming out of surgery, and my son had came up. He was only 4 at the time, and he was just kind of looking. He'd said to my wife, you know, is Dad okay? He looks scared, but it's because I was like white as a sheet. You know, I just had surgery, and so I can only but imagine, like, you know, being so young as well, and having those thoughts of, you know, being a father. You know, you've always kind of wanted that. What did they? Because I don't know what it's like down in England, but certainly like up here, you know, they make you kind of give you the option to go and give your sample and kind of take that away. But the questions that, you know, are on the kind of sheet are quite heavy, you know. So as a 20-year-old, is that something that happened for you then? Did you have to go in and, you know, talk about your fertility in that way?
Yeah, it really did. To have to be probed questions about your sex life and sperm and parenting it was a really hard thing to deal with at 20 years old. And on top of that, having to the results of the sperm test was that there wasn't any sperm and that I was infertile. And they said that might be the body preserving itself, and that I would have to see post the surgery whether my sperm would come back. And at the age of 20, then having to also think about, well, if I have a potential partner, how do you tell them that you are infertile? And whilst I wasn't looking to father any children at 20 years old, to have that in my mind at such a young age, knowing that I wanted to be a father and a husband one day, having those emotions on my shoulders, in addition with the trauma of the cancer and the way that it happened and the speed that it happened and all of these different experiences that happened to me, it was really hard to deal with. Absolutely. I wonder whether, I hope what I'm talking about will resonate with people listening. You know, there were times where I've had experiences when I'd lost my hair and somebody made a joke about me looking bald. I mean, not that I've got much hair now, but I have an excuse. I'm nearly 40, so I'll take that. But at the age of 20, having to kind of deal with abuse was difficult, and a joke made about my panda eyes, because from the treatment, my eyes were very puffy and I looked really bad. Somebody making a joke, or people insensitive comments, and all of the trauma then around my body and all of the sort of things I was having to contemplate was really difficult to deal with. And I took that pain through back to university, and I did manage with it. And I graduated in 2005. I got a 2-1. I didn't need any extenuating circumstances because I worked really hard. I'm a very determined person. I was like, this is not going to beat me. And I graduated, and then a couple of weeks later I got my first job. But always in the back of my mind and on my shoulders was the emotion and the trauma of what I'd been through.
Yeah. And it's funny, like when you talk about the kind of the way that you felt and looked at it, was always something that I can always poked fun at myself, and I still do actually. Like in the talks, you know, whenever I'm at high school, I have this picture that I'm out with my wife, and I've got the bald head, the panda eyes, but I always kind of fade it into a picture of Uncle Fester, you know, and say, you know, I thought I looked like Jason Statham, but actually I looked like Uncle Fester. So, but it is, and it's a tough thing, you know, and again, I can only relate to a certain degree, but being in your 20s, you know, it's you're kind of the peak, really, of like, you know, those feelings of like, you know, it's not, you don't go through these things as body shame, but you're really self-conscious about every aspect of your body as well. So to kind of go through that is difficult. So during your first recovery, you know, you'd set yourself a kind of a challenge then, you know, to do the New York Marathon. Was that inspired by your battle with your cancer and the subsequent, you know, like obviously how hard you worked at uni. Was that something that kind of provoked that thought?
So what happened was I recovered and got my first job, and then I moved kind of slightly as I got older, advanced my career. And it was 2008, and I currently work in PR as well as having my own coaching business. And at the time, I had my job in PR, and I felt a lump. And this is in September 2008, so 4 years later. And I went to the GP, and I said, I can feel a lump. And they were like, no, there's nothing there. And they were wrong. And I knew that I had to go to my consultant to get it checked out, which I'm pleased that I did, because it was another tumour. And it meant that I had to make more decisions at the age of 24 around my body and sperm donation. And actually at this point, I found out that some of my sperm had recovered. So I was able to bank some sperm, which was amazing. One glint of positive news, but I also had to make a decision around what type of operation. It was my choice. What I do with my body and what chances then I might take of a further recurrence. And that was difficult. And after having the tumour removed again and another course of chemo, I was quite emboldened then to do something. And I was like, I really want to run the New York Marathon. I want to go back to New York. I want to run a marathon. I can do this. And in the sort of January of 2009, I signed up with a men's cancer charity called Orchid. And they gave me a spot for what they had. And I trained throughout 2009, which was quite a pivotal year in my life, because I did some more study. I met my wife, who at that point she was my girlfriend, and I completed the marathon. So a lot happened in that year, and I think the running helped me to process what happened to me. I think it helped deal with some of the trauma. Running is a great way to kind of process your thoughts, because you have no screens, you focus on your breathing and your thinking, and if you're running either on the treadmill or outside, that's all really you can do. You can think, and that helped me to process. And running the marathons was one of the hardest things that I've ever done, but one of the most empowering things. And running across that finish line, I mean, it took me ages, Paul. I was talking away to everyone, people were talking to me, and we were talking about our cancer stories, because kind of cancer survivors often end up congregating with each other to be like, tell me about your story. Where's your war wound, and so on.
Yeah.
And
It's because usually we're all at the back.
yeah, well, exactly. So we were the slow runners, but I made it over the line, and it was a defining moment in my life. And I do have a phrase that if anybody I know is listening to this podcast, and they'll know that I joke, because I say I ran a marathon, but I don't like to talk about it. Ask me about the marathon. And I do like talking about it because it's a huge sense of pride. I raised £5,500 for Orchid, and I really think it helped me to move forward until I was diagnosed again.
So obviously you've had that secondary cancer diagnosis, the second cancer diagnosis, and you were saying about the kind of the choice of that. So did you just get the tumour itself removed, not the testicle, or was it the full testicle that got removed that second time as well?
At that point, I made the decision to have a partial orchidectomy to remove the tumour, but to leave me with part of my testicle that wasn't affected by cancer. And that gave me then the option that I could then decide what I wanted to do, that if the cancer didn't come back, that I would still not, I'd still have my body, and I wouldn't have to think about hormone replacement or anything like that.
Yeah. It's just because and obviously doing the kind of research like before this, I didn't realise that a partial orchidectomy was a thing. It was because I was talking to Todd, who's one of our supporters, he's a dual testicular cancer survivor. So he's what we call a flat bagger in the industry. So Todd was kind of saying, like, I'd text him saying, by the way, you've got some beating. We've got a guy, has had 3 diagnoses, and he just sent me back the Ron Burgundy meme of, I don't believe you. So I was like, no, honestly, mate. So wait until you hear this guy's story. So that's why I was asking as well, is because I didn't want to read too much, just because I want to hear your story firsthand myself as well. So. Yeah, so okay, so then you've done the marathon. So how did that 3rd diagnosis then come about? What was it? How was it led you to that?
So it was 2012, and I had a really busy year. I'd left my job in PR in one organisation to join another, and that job was a big step change in my career, in my working hours, in my responsibilities. And so 2012 was a really busy year. I had also gotten engaged. I had just bought a house, and I was working on a campaign around the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I'd come out the other side of it, and I was really tired, but felt quite accomplished with what I had achieved. And it was time for me to have my regular checkup. And there's a bit of a theme here, because it was 4 years later, and it was the autumn again. It was September again. And I was at a clinic on Harley Street, which is in London. And I was having the ultrasound, and the sonographer was taking a very long time. And again, back to the dark humour of cancer, I was sat laying down with my trousers and pants around my ankles. And it's not glamorous. And I was like, this guy is looking at my genitals for a really long time. I'm like, God, just take a picture. And from the dark humour, there was the words, I think I found a lump. And I couldn't believe it, because you'd get to a point, Paul, when you have these scans, and in a way you get a bit of comfort that things are okay and that you get through each one. And you don't want to believe, but each time you get through another month, another 6 months, another year, that you're okay, that you are okay. And so to hear that you have another lump is terrifying. And I walked up the stairs from the basement of the clinic, and I was about to go and see the consultant about half an hour later, and I didn't know what to do. I thought to myself, do I tell Leanne, my then fiance, do I take this news alone? It's like my life had turned almost 360 full circle, that I was back in Australia on my own. This was 8 years forward, but it was like it was 8 years back again, and I had to make a choice. What do I do now? And so I had to go outside of Harley Street on these steps, and I had to call Leanne and tell her that I needed her. And I think all I managed to say the words were, I need you. And I think she knew, and she managed to get to me from the other side of London to Harley Street. And outside the clinic on Harley Street were some black iron railings that went down the stairs, if you can picture those type of old-fashioned railings. And I held on to those railings for dear life. I felt that if I let go of those railings, that the world would swallow me up. It's the only way I could describe it. I was so terrified and sad, and almost perhaps a feeling of ashamed, and I can't really explain why that emotion. And we saw the consultant together, who told me that it was a 3rd diagnosis of testicular cancer, and I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't comprehend that this was happening again. And we were going to be married the following June. This was the September. And so more scans and more worry, because at this point I was 28, and I was thinking about my future life, about having a baby, getting married, my life, my career. And then the things that go through your head are, what's going to happen if I die? Who's going to pay the mortgage on the house? I'm never going to have the child that I've always dreamt about. What am I going to tell my employer? All of these things. And it transpired the cancer hadn't spread, but that I needed to have the tumour removed. And I was very sad. I think this really knocked me and my confidence and my purpose of who I was and what I stood for. And I had 4 weeks off work before returning to work. And again, I think I should have had some longer time off because of the trauma. And it was just a really, really difficult, sad time.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that it's, that can happen to you. You know that those 3 times, and obviously at that point you're already planning for this. This celebration of getting married. How did that subsequent diagnosis and then treatment for that affect that, like, your relationship with your then fiance, now wife, and planning for something that was meant to be the happiest day of your life, but you're going through this trauma of a third cancer diagnosis?
So Leanne was amazing, and she is amazing, and she was very supportive and strong. And on the night before my operation, I was sat on the edge of our bed listening to what was going to be our wedding song. And I remember just breaking down in tears listening to this song, saying to Leanne that I didn't want to go to sleep, because if I went to sleep, I'd have to wake up and have the operation to remove the tumour, and I just couldn't face it. And it was a very dark moment in my life, to think about the next day. And again, I had to walk myself down to have the operation to remove the tumour. And I was so distraught. Again, they had to give me another sedative because it broke me. And I think what pushed me forward was the thought of my wedding. And through the end of 2012 going into 2013, I kind of focused on the wedding. And also we already had in train that this would mean that we'd have to look at other ways to become parents. And we already got the ball rolling on IVF. And I put one foot in front of the other, and I pushed myself to the wedding day. And we had a very happy wedding day. And when I reflect, I was very successful at work. I was promoted, and I used my strength to push me forward. But I don't think I truly dealt again with the trauma. I think it opened up old wounds, as you would imagine. But the wedding was the highlight, and having the strength of Leanne and the love of Leanne and my mum and dad and her parents played a huge part in putting me back together, or my recovery. But I will use the recovery in perhaps in the health sense, not in the physical health sense, not in the mental health sense, because I think it had, as you would imagine, it really affected me.
Yeah. And I think, again, I can only kind of look at it from the experience of myself, where, I know the impact that it had on me, just with that singular diagnosis, and going through that. But to have that, and thinking, and I know exactly the thoughts that you had. You think, you go for these scans, and you think, yep, it's going to be all right, it's going to be fine. And then, to hear news like that, not once after, but twice, is, yeah, I can imagine why that was so hard. And it's amazing, though, that you had that love and connection with Leanne as well to kind of help you get through that, and to have your wedding day be as successful as it was. It must have been quite an emotional day internally for you. Whether anybody else knew it or not, it must have been.
They knew. They saw the tears. I had an amazing wedding day. I sang to Leanne on our wedding day, And it was a lovely, lovely moment. I'm going to say, Paul, that I can hold a tune. I don't like to talk about it, but ask me how I sang to Leanne on our wedding day. It's one of those type of stories. And I loved it. And we had an amazing honeymoon. We went to Uganda and Zanzibar in Africa, and we saw gorillas in the wild, and we had a fabulous time. And that helped to give me a sense of normality. But knowing that we had a journey in front of us to become parents, which I really hadn't anticipated how painful and arduous and long and complex it would be, which is the kind of the next chapter of my story.
And it's one that throughout these discussions that we've found, isn't something that guys talk about very often, and male fertility isn't spoken about very often. And I know that, when it comes to like IVF treatments, there's a lot of illness on the kind of the female partner going through quite a kind of heavy burden. But to have that implication that it's something that you had no control over, that your fertility was something that you never would have thought about until the point that you were diagnosed with testicular cancer. And then I think it's still, looked over. Male fertility is still something that isn't talked about, especially, coinciding with testicular cancer. So to have, conversation like this with yourself and again, like, thank you for being so open and talking about that. But I think it is something that, not just the listeners who are possibly going through it, but also their partners and, even people outside of that. So when, that kind of next chapter of your journey as such, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the day before the day after I'd found out that I'd had the third diagnosis of cancer, I was actually due to go to hospital to give a sperm test, and we had to cancel it. And there was no time for me to provide any more sperm. And so what I had banked was what I had banked. And it wasn't the best quality sperm that had been affected by the cancer. And so we had to make an appointment with the GP to get the ball rolling. And I think that was a bit of an indication of how poor the experience for me was going to be and how hard it would be. And I think that you're right that people don't really talk about how hard it is for men. And also, I think there's quite a lack of sensitivity around that topic and cancer survivors. I remembered that I walked through the door at the GP, and the GP said to both of us, "Which one of you've got the problem?" And when he said that, and then when I sort of indicated it was me and pointed me to a chair, that was sort of a signal of how things were going to go. And because it was clear that there was no natural way that we were going to be able to have children, that we were referred, and we would need what was called, it's not actually called IVF, it's called ICSI, is the treatment that we needed to have, because it was around, I'm not an expert when it comes to these things, but it's about kind of the putting the kind of the injecting the sperm into the egg, but in a way where you're sort of, I think, forcing the sperm to the egg to kind of create the embryo rather. So it's a slightly different type of fertility treatment, I think, that's aimed at kind of lower men with maybe kind of not brilliant sperm quality. And we had 3 goes on. We were given 3 goes on the NHS. Now, technically it was 2 goes, but if you have a frozen cycle, and they bank more, and there's more kind of embryos that they can then transfer, you get another go. And so we were not hugely optimistic, but then you're as optimistic as the next person, because you think, well, our chances are the same as everybody else. So going through that process the first time and it not working, we were sad, but I think we understood that it probably wasn't going to work anyway, because these things don't. And then on the second time, I remember sitting on the stairs outside the bathroom while Leanne did a pregnancy test, and the sadness of Leanne saying it was negative on the second time was really hard. Of course, it was so hard for her. It was hard for both of us. And it's just, the only way to describe it is that your hopes and dreams are just dashed. And this feeling of hope just gets smaller and smaller. And then we had the third. It is, because in a way that you look at these embryos and you get a scan of the embryo being put inside, the uterus, and that you feel like that's your child. But then when it doesn't turn into a baby, then it's not. And then you do feel like it's a loss. And on the third time, Leanne just called me crying when I was in I was in a cubicle, and I just heard her crying on the phone when I was at the beginning. I was starting a new job, and there's nothing I could do. We went private, and we went to a fertility treatment, a private clinic, and we did another kind of extracting of the embryos, and there was 3, and we named, one of them was called Jim Bob, one was called Mary, and I think the other one was Tallulah. I'm sure I'll get this wrong now, Paul, and when Leanne listens to this back, I'll be in trouble, but I can tell you definitely that one was called Jim Bob and one was Mary. And the embryo called Mary was like the weakest one. What happens is, the way that they choose it is they look at the ones that they'll put the strongest embryo with the strongest chance of developing into a baby, into your partner. And the one that was called Mary just was growing really slowly, but it grew, but really slowly. So we went with, I think we tried putting in 2 embryos, because then it may have been twins, you're increasing your chances, and it failed. And at this point, we'd almost spent £50,000 on treatment. It cost a lot of money. We were privileged, in a privileged position to do it, but this was we had one go left, and we used the embryo Mary. And we both didn't really hold much hope, but the fertility treatment discovered that Leanne had something called a higher rate of natural killer cells. So they had a certain treatment to help deal with that, to stop the body attacking the embryo. And at this point, sort of all my hopes and dreams had sort of dashed, and it's a kind of a constant wave of sadness. What, for me at the time, and the way that I look at it back, is that the cancer and the IVF is sort of one trauma in a way, rather than, we had facility treatment and it was a standalone. I do see them as a kind of part of a similar, or part of my story. And on a Friday in August, Leanne called me and said, "I'm pregnant." And I couldn't believe it. I made her call the fertility centre and check that it was her that was pregnant and not somebody else, because it was not done on like peeing on a stick. It was done by a blood test. And I was like, just make sure that it's you. And I truly couldn't believe it. I never thought that after that many years, from 2004 to at this point, 2015, that I would actually have a baby. And that pregnancy, oh my goodness, was the emotions and where do you place your emotions? Where do you when, I don't know if you remember, like when you had your first one, you don't tell people until it's 12 weeks, and then you're worried. But for us at this point, we had to have a scan at 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. So we had scans to see the embryo grow and grow, which was amazing, and listen to the heartbeat. And going from a place of fear and worry to a place of happiness and joy was very unusual, because I didn't want to settle into it. I was too scared to embrace it in case it was snatched away from me. And we approached the 12-week scan, and they said that the baby was fine and was growing, and that we could tell people. And that was amazing. I made a little video, I circulated it to my friends, and we were so happy. And we settled into the pregnancy. We decided to book a holiday because we thought, let's, go and enjoy ourselves before the baby comes. And it was December 2015, and we needed to have the 20-week scan. And we went along, and I remember discussing something really banal with Leanne about, oh, when are we going to do this for the holiday? Let's get that sorted. And they called her in, and they said to us, your baby's in a funny position that you need to come back in a couple of weeks' time. We can't get the measurements right. Fine, it's fine. Silly baby hiding away. We came back at the end of kind of mid-December time, actually. It was mid-December, and it was the 23-week scan. And they said to us on the Monday, it was a Monday, the scan in Barnet General Hospital, London, that the baby is smaller than it should be at this stage. I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. So they referred us to a specialist hospital, UCLH in London, University College London Hospital. And we went there on the Wednesday, and it was quite ominous walking and meeting Leanne at Warren Street Tube Station and walking into the hospital. And they walked us into a room for a scan, a really big room with 3 clinicians. And they said to us that the pregnancy may not be viable because the blood flow from the placenta to the baby, there was a problem, and the baby wasn't growing properly, and that she turned out to be a she. We'll come on to that. The baby would be stillborn. And that feeling of being 20 years old again and being in Australia and having a bomb dropped on you, it was like the wound had opened fresh. And I was dumbfounded that of all the people and the couples that this could have happened to, that it was happening to us, that our last roll of the dice to become parents was being blown apart, and we would go through the trauma of having to bury a baby. And it was really difficult, and we had to then have subsequent scans like 3 times a week to see if the baby was growing, and that if Leanne couldn't no longer feel the baby, there was a chance that actually that would mean that she would have had a miscarriage, because the blood flow to the baby would have stopped. And on Christmas Eve and on Boxing Day of that year in 2015, we ended up in hospital because Leanne couldn't feel the baby move. And then each week, they did say they could see it, they could see and hear the heartbeat, and sat there waiting to hear a heartbeat of a baby that you think is not there is one of the worst things, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And then as the weeks went on, we were seeing that the baby was growing but very small. And then we reached the end of January 2016, and Leanne couldn't feel the baby. It was a Sunday night. We ended back up in UCLH. On the Monday morning, they said to us that the baby had to be born prematurely. So Leanne was given steroids, which was to help the baby's lungs. And on Wednesday, the 27th of January, 2016, our daughter Aria Rae was born, and Aria weighed 550 grams, which is about £1.1. And we walked in, just rolling back a bit, we walked in to the operating theatre to have a cesarean, hand in hand, and it was very eerie. Another eerie moment in my life. It was about after midnight, so it was dead quiet. And hearing your baby's cry for the first time, I don't know whether, it's hard to say what emotion I felt. Happiness, but then the baby was taken away. We didn't even see the baby. We didn't know what the baby was, the sex of the baby. We didn't know if the baby was all right. And we were told it was a girl and what she weighed. And then I saw Aria. And then a couple of hours later, we were able to wheel Leanne down in her bed to see Aria, who was in a incubator, and she was put inside a plastic bag because she was so tiny, and she had wires going all in and out of her. And Aria was born at 28 weeks and 6 days, so she was about 11 weeks early. And seeing my baby in an incubator covered in wires and hearing machines, I felt helpless. I felt really helpless, and not knowing whether she would survive. If she would survive, would she be blind? Would she be deaf? Would she have a disability? Because that's common with premature babies. And it was a long wait. And with premature babies that are born so premature, they're at risk of catching something called NEC, which is an acronym what I won't be able to say the full word because it's really hard to explain, but it basically means that they can succumb to a really severe stomach infection, which is life-threatening. And every day we were worried about, is she going to succumb to this? In the first couple of weeks, she was very poorly, and they had to put a line inside of her, which effectively some sort of line that went up her shoulder and her back, and I just couldn't cope. I couldn't be there to have that. She had to have brain scans to check for bleeds on the brain, and it was a very dark, lonely, and vulnerable time for both of us. And we lived in that hospital, right? We live in North London, and we had to leave Aria every night in central London. And then she stabilised and was transferred to our local hospital in Barnet, which made things a little easier. And she was in hospital for 12 weeks and in Barnet for about 8-9 of those weeks. And she was in intensive care, and it felt like just time stopped, because you're waiting for your baby to get better, to control its, being able to keep itself warm, regulate its kind of temperature, to grow. Aria was so tiny. Most babies, average babies, weigh 7 pounds. She weighed 1 pound. And we were waiting for all of these things to happen, and it felt like Mount Everest. It didn't feel like just any old mountain. It felt like a huge barrier for us to climb, and to also fight with doctors to give her what she needed. And whilst the NHS were great, we received conflicting information and we had to push for certain things. But she grew, and she got stronger, and she did pass those milestones. And on the 20, I'm going to get it wrong now, 1st of April 2016, she came home, and she weighed 4 pounds. And when we walked out of the hospital with her in the carry cot, maxi cozy, it felt unusual to be able to leave with our baby that we'd left every night for 12 weeks, that I'd wanted since I was a teenager, that I had hoped and dreamed for. And this little embryo that was called Mary had gone through all of that. And to get her home and to put her in a cot and to look at her and to cuddle her and to be with her, I couldn't believe it. And the joy that gave me through the sorrow that I had experienced was much needed.
That's an incredible story, man. And I don't know how you've managed to kind of knuckle down and kind of get through that emotionally. I mean, it's the trauma of every aspect of that, sounds way more than I could ever imagine, really. I think as well, having been through all of that, and is that something, as you as a person and showing that strength and resilience to get through that, is that something that is incorporated into your own experiences to then start and that have that inspiration behind becoming starting Coach Simon Limited? Is that something that was the kind of catalyst for you wanting to do that and to help people in the way that you are?
Yes, thank you. It took me a really long time to move forward from what had happened. And what I do want to say is Aria is going to be 8, and that's going to happen next week. And the joy from becoming a parent and getting through it gives me so much. And for a long time, Paul, I didn't realize my own strength or my resilience. And during the pandemic, I had a bit of another health scare actually, but I was fine. And I woke up going, what's going on? Like, what is going on? Who am I? What am I doing? And I, for a long time, have wanted to use my purpose to help others. And through becoming a coach and the coach training and through having my own counselling, I sort of realised different things about myself. And this is sort of one of the messages that I want to tell people that are listening. That for me personally, for a long time, I saw myself as somebody who was quite weak, who was not very strong, who was less of a man. In some ways, that I believed that what happened to me was my own fault. But that's not true. It's not true. It's mindset, right? I've changed my mindset, and the brain is so powerful. The brain is so powerful that it will repeat limiting beliefs about ourselves because it's habit, and the brain is efficient and lazily and will grasp on to the things that you tell yourself. And I told myself for a long time that I was those things, right? But I changed my thinking. I have changed my thinking, and who I am is somebody who is very positive, who is very determined. I am a very strong man, and the way that I would describe myself is a warrior, and I am bloody resilient, and that's how I choose to see myself. And how do I back that up? Well, I back that up with the facts of what I've been through. I back that up with the fact that I'm still kind and I'm not bitter and I'm compassionate and I'm caring. And the way that I see my purpose is to help other people. And I talk about limiting beliefs and I talk about mindset because I believe that you can change your thinking, right? And when you change your thinking, the way that you see yourself, and that you focus on facts rather than beliefs, rather than limiting beliefs, these are the beliefs that can hold you back, that you can unlock your greatness and you can be who you want to be. And I believe that my skills and my purpose is to help others do that. And that's why I've got my own coaching business, Coach Simon. And what I want to do and what I'm doing with that business is supporting other men who've had cancer and other people who've had cancer, so of course women too, to come out the other side and to work out who is it that you want to be, what is it that you want to do, how do you may not want to go back to the life that you had before cancer. And my role that I see it is to help somebody see that they can achieve whatever they want in life, because cancer knocks you. You may not want to go back to who you were. And it gives you that opportunity. But it's hard when somebody says, I've got a second chance. I've got a second chance at life. But sometimes you don't know what that to do with that chance. Sometimes you feel like you're wasting your chance or that opportunity. And what my purpose, I believe my purpose and what my business is going to do and is doing, will support others to take that opportunity to work out and to have the space to think, what is it I want to do? And to help them get there. And I talk about greatness because I believe that people are great, but we put a mask on we put weights on our shoulders that stop us being who we were meant to be. And I believe that my role as a coach and what I do as a coach is to help chip away at that and to let people let go of the things that they don't need, so they can just see themselves as great. And that's how I see myself, right? I see myself as somebody who is strong, who is positive, who is a warrior, who is here to support other people because I've changed my mindset. And it's because I believe in myself and I'm choosing to believe the things that are based in fact, based on what I have been through, rather than focusing on these self-limiting beliefs that I'm not strong, because it's not true. To have got through what I've got through, to go through cancer, for anyone else that's listening to this podcast and yourself, Paul, to get through and go through cancer, because it doesn't just leave you, shows that you are strong and that you are resilient, because you have no choice to be. You have no choice but to be resilient when you're going through cancer. You don't all of a sudden say, I'm going to be resilient today, because you have no choice. But what it's about doing is recognizing your strength. It's about seeing yourself for who you really are and what you can do and using it. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's amazing, because it's something that I think, I've certainly been through, and I think my cancer's changed me as a person, fundamentally, and I've had lots of conversations where that seems to be the case as well with other guys. But, to have that positive look on yourself, I think for a long time, I did feel that, I was kind of weaker than maybe I was, and, blame yourself for maybe I blame myself for having cancer, for, the kind of lifestyle you lead, growing up and things like that. But it's such an amazing thing that's happened to you in terms of how you've went through all this adversity, and now realising your resilience, because I think it's something that's lacking as well in kind of today's society. That resilience, has disappeared. And, it's one of my friends, David, he's got a podcast called Remember Resilience, and that's what he touches on quite a lot. And it's speaking to people, who have kind of shown that resilience as well, and trying to get people back to that. And I heard a quote recently. It's like, the worst thing to happen to you is the worst thing to happen to you. So for us, we've had these cancer diagnoses, and that's horrific and bad. But you might have somebody who maybe hasn't had that experience, but they've maybe had a fairly kind of clean, straight path that, when something that most people might go, that's not that bad, but it's still something that's going to affect somebody's psyche. And to have, guys like yourself out there who do that kind of that coaching, and I done coaching for a little bit in terms of, like, I got it through the NHS at one point. And you can really see the benefits of that. And, I'd encourage anybody to kind of, speak openly, and especially like the listeners of this show, who we have hopefully, will see this and, think of themselves as being a warrior, and I think I told you in the time when we spoke on the phone, is that in the cards that, Cahonas were putting in the "you got this" boxes, that was the exact phrase that I wrote. I was like, you are a warrior. And I think it was something that, really resonated with me, because, they are, and we are. And I think what you're doing is amazing, mate. I really do.
Thank you. When you talk about resilience and that perhaps people have lost resilience, I think, and I don't say this with a critical heart, what I think is, with social media and that life is tough, it's really easy to look outwards. It's really easy to look outwards at others, and people will talk about, you've got to be resilient, and this is what you've got to do, and outwards, outwards, outwards. But resilience isn't about the out, it's about what's in here, right? And it's about looking at yourself. It's about looking what you've done, what you can do, how you're going to get there, reflecting on where you've been, what you've gone through. And you're right, we have a shared experience and a commonality of cancer. Your experience, of course, will be different to mine. You had a child. I can't imagine the emotions of having to think about your own emotions, and that then of your wife and your child. Everyone goes through something. I always believe that this is my story, but everyone else has got their story. Everyone else is going through something. You don't know what someone else is carrying. And I think it's about looking, and as I said earlier, recognizing who you are and your strengths and what you've been through, and reflecting and celebrating. I don't think we celebrate our achievements enough. I think we are very quick as individuals to move forward. It's the society, it's the way the brain works, that I'll get on to the next thing. And what I encourage my clients, and what I'd encourage people listening to do, is to focus on what you've achieved. And whether that's through a cancer diagnosis, something that you've overcome at work, or another hardship that you've gone through. It doesn't always have to be something that's a negative thing. You can build resilience through challenging times, but challenging doesn't always mean that that's a bad thing. And you can focus on what you've done. And that's why I see myself as somebody who's strong and as a warrior. because it's true. I had the evidence to back it up. So my message is to people listening, focus on what you have achieved, focus on what you have been through. And when you are going through a difficult time, look at how you got through that. Look at what you've learned from that, and look at what you can do next. And look at your options, and look at how you want to use your energy and your mental and your physical energy, and how can you use that to get you through a difficult time. It's not about the out, it's about the in. And I think that you can do it. It's not easy. Things in life that challenge us aren't easy, but we can overcome them. And having the mindset is so powerful. Having a growth mindset and thinking about what you can do in life is so positive. The brain, there's a term called neuroplasticity, which you may have heard of, Paul, and it's around how the brain can grow and shape and form new pathways. And that's what a growth mindset is. When you have a fixed mindset, you have one neuron to another neuron, and in short, and no neuroscience, but in short, if you think something negative about yourself, that it will just keep repeating. Well, this has happened. I'm going to have a negative thought, bang, it's the same thing. And a thought leads to a feeling that leads to an action, right? A thought that somebody might think about something will lead to, I think I'm no good at something. That's going to make me feel sad or self-loathing. And the action that I will do might be something that's self-destructive, right? A thought equals a feeling that leads to an action. But when you change your mindset and you can change it and you create a new neural pathway, that you tell yourself that I can do something, that I will achieve something, I am resilient, I am strong, and you keep repeating it, then the brain goes, all right, this is new, and I'm backing up by this. And that becomes the habit. That becomes the new pathway. That becomes the consistency. That becomes the habit that you form because it's how you see yourself. And I use a lot of self-affirmation. My self-affirmation is I will and I can. And it's so powerful for me because it helps me get through difficult times. It helps me think that when I want to say I can't and I don't, I tell myself I will and I can, and that I'm going to do this. And I in the last year have achieved some things I never thought possible, such as starting my own business, getting clients, changing lives, doing more training, holding down a job, and doing all these other things, and joining different groups because I told myself that I can do it. And I recognize my privilege, and I recognize what I have, but I do think having a mindset is helping me achieve it. And for me, it's I will and I can and I am.
Simon, honestly, thank you so much. That was great, and I think there's not a better kind of point to end such a poignant podcast on than that. I can only thank you enough for coming on and speaking to us and doing exactly what I really hope for this podcast, and it's for men to really be open and honest and share our experiences, and the way that you've done that today, you know, again, I'm really, really grateful to hear from you.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. So I always kind of like the guests to kind of do this at the end. So just, you know, in terms of like kind of yourself and the kind of new business, you know, feel free to plug away and any kind of thing that you want to kind of get out there to our listeners, because hopefully guys who listen to this, you know, and maybe do feel like they want to reach out can. So just fire away.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So it's my privilege to be a coach, and people might think, well, what's coaching? What's the difference between coaching and counseling and mentoring and so on? My role as a coach is to back and to support people and to show challenge and to champion them. But I don't tell people what to think or do, because that would be mentoring. And coaching isn't counseling because I'm not a trained therapist. Whilst coaching can talk about the past, really it's focused on, coaching is very proactive. It's focusing on the here and now goals and where you want to get to. And my business and what I'm about is helping to unlock people's greatness. And for people listening out there, if you've experienced a form of cancer and you've come out the other side and you're thinking, I don't know what to do with my life anymore, I don't know who I am, Or you might be thinking, I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to do this. I want to take my career to the next level. I want to get there. I want to redefine who I am. Then I'm the person that can help you, because how I work with someone is together we work out what is important to you. What is it that you can do to think about the options and the opportunities that are available to you, and to help you get to where you want to be. For us cancer survivors, we know that life is short, but it is difficult to take that next leap to, as I said earlier, to kind of realize your second chance. But I can help you get there. I won't tell you what it is. I can't tell you what it is because that's down to you, but I can use my skills and my challenge and my purpose to help you get what you really, really want in life. So if that sounds like you and that you'd like my help, then get in touch. So you can drop me a line at simon@coachsimon.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn under Simon Feldman. My website, coachsimon.com, is coming soon. But for now, that's the best way to get in touch with me, either simon@coachsimon.com or via LinkedIn. Websites come soon. And as I said earlier, coaching to me is about unlocking and uncovering people's greatness. And I'm doing that in my own life, and I can do that to help you with yours.
Right. Excellent. Thank you so much, mate.